Hi everybody, my name is Jens Larsen. In this video I'm going to take the Hirajoshi scale, which is a Japanese pentatonic scale, and I'm going to show you how that works extremely well for making some licks with a Dorian or a Lydian type sound. I'm also going to show you how, if you take any scale, but in this case just the pentatonic scale, how I go about looking for melodic ideas and finding arpeggios and patterns within the scale that you can use when you're making lines and when you're getting used to it. If you want to learn more about jazz guitar, about improvising over chord changes and interesting scales and arpeggios, then subscribe to my channel. If you want to make sure not to miss anything, then click the little bell notification icon next to the subscribe button. The Hirajoshi scale is a pentatonic scale, and of course Hirajoshi is, and I hope I'm not completely slaughtering the name, is a Japanese word, so it's a Japanese pentatonic scale. If you check this out on Wikipedia and a few other places, you'll see that they don't really agree on where the root is. The way I'm going to think about the scale in this video, because I don't really care too much about what the root of the scale is, because I'm putting it on top of other chords, is that if it's in the key of E, or if I think of E as the root here, then we have this scale, so E, F sharp, G, B, C, and E. So you can look at this as being sort of a pentatonic scale. If you build a pentatonic scale from the 6th degree in a major scale, then this is actually what you get, because you would use 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6. Similar to if you play one from C major, it would be 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. So that's kind of one way of looking at it. It's easy to relate to it if we think of it like that, because it's close to how we normally work with pentatonic scales. There are going to be a few things that I'm going to work with. This is going to be a little bit guitar oriented in terms of some of the patterns that I'm using and some of the approaches to finding material. But for the rest, this whole video will actually work just as well for any other instrument. It's not really about that, but I'm going to use a few guitar tricks, so to speak. The way we play pentatonic scales most of the time on guitar is 2 notes per string. So of course you know this A minor pentatonic scale. If we take this scale and make that into a 2 note per string structure, then that could be something like this. And of course you can do this in 5 positions because it's a pentatonic scale. The reason why I'm doing this might seem less than obvious in the beginning, but there are just a lot of things that are really nice to do with 2 notes per string patterns, and we already know them because we already checked out a lot of stuff with pentatonic scales. So we might as well try and use them on other structures that are similar to the normal minor pentatonic scale that we all know and love so much. Another way of playing this pentatonic scale that's really useful is to think of it as being sort of a small cell that you can move around in octaves. And probably anybody who's checked out any kind of heavy metal soloing tutorials online will recognize this shape. To start exploring the scale and figuring out what kind of chords we can use it on, let's just look at the notes and see if we can come up with something. So if we have E, F sharp, G, B, C, and then of course it repeats, so E, F sharp, G, B, C, E. Then we have 2 octaves of the scale. And a few things that sort of jumps out at me is that if we take the notes C, E, and G, then we have a C major triad, so that's in there. We can also take E, G, and B. Well, actually, I play that here, so E, G, and B, that's an E minor triad. Another structure that's in there is B, E, and F sharp, so that's a B sus4. And also one that's a little bit less common would be F sharp, B, and C, which is like an F dim sharp sus4 triad. So if we look at those triads, then we can also see that we have actually a complete C major 7 arpeggio in here, and actually the scale is C major 7 with an added sharp 11. So that's kind of giving us that Lydian vibe, and that's also what's telling us that we can use this really well to get sort of a Dorian sound, so like a C major 7 sharp 11, like this one over an A, so that could be this type of sound, which is probably where I would suggest using this. The reason why I don't use it on E is that we don't actually have a 7th degree, so we only have the C, but we are kind of missing something that would be a D or a D sharp to get something that we can really use on an E minor, in my opinion anyway. The next thing we can do is to take some structure and then try and move that through the scale just to get a better overview of what is in there and see if we can find some arpeggios or chords that we can use. And I'm just going to start with really just looking at what notes are in there and then making sort of an observation on what is possible to make. And the voicing that I have here is a G major 7 shell voicing, which is contained in the scale because we have G, B and F sharp in the scale. And if I move that through the scale, so the idea here is this scale is kind of easy to think of on one string, because we have sort of one cluster of notes, which is E, F sharp and G, and then we have B and C, and then that repeats. So those patterns really help us when we need to move something along the neck as like a chord shape like this through the scale. And really that's what I'm going to be doing in this next example. So we start with the G major 7 shell voicing, and I'm not going to do it in detail for all the voicings, but just to show you the idea. So G, the next note up from G would be a B. From this B here, the next note is a C. From the F sharp, the next note is a G, and then we have this one. If we do that again, then B moves up to C, C moves up to E, and G moves up to B, and then we have a C major shell voicing. And we can just repeat that, and then we get this voicing and this voicing. So all in all, some really interesting sounding voicings that we can use, and they will all work really well for some sort of A minor, Dorian or C Lydian sound. And of course we can also use them as arpeggios. So if we start building chords in the same way that we can with a normal pentatonic scale, then really what we do is usually just to sort of split the pentatonic scale in like a first and a second row of notes, and then just put 3 notes together. And if we do that with this fingering, so we have of course this fingering for this scale, then we get these voicings. And here we have this one, which is kind of like a D7 without a 13 without a D, or an A minor 6, or some sort of C major 7 sharp 11 without a third. So that's useful for the kind of sound that we're going for. The next one, this one, is the same as this. If I play it an octave higher, that's a C major triad in the first inversion. Then we get this stagger fourth from F sharp, which is in fact our B, see, so B sus 4 triad. Then we have this, which is like a C Lydian triad in inversion, and then we get the final one, which is an E minor triad. So if I take these triads and then move them along the neck on the middle string set, then that will be this. As I mentioned, there are some things that are really easy to play if we think in terms of the 2 notes per string patterns, and then some stuff will just sort of fall naturally within the scale and give us some great material to work with. And an example of that could be this pattern that's a 5-note grouping starting on this G. So a similar idea could be a pattern like this. And of course this scale is laid out quite differently on the fretboard with the 2 notes per string type pattern, and it's more difficult to play than a normal minor pentatonic scale. But still, I think this works really well, and it's a nice way to just come up with some ideas, and you can use some of the same patterns that you would normally use in a pentatonic scale. So in that way it's easy to just translate some material and get some easy accessible melodic ideas from that way. This first example starts off with this arpeggio, which is of course the D713 chordal voicing without the root. And this is an arpeggio that I use really a lot. I find it extremely useful both for like the Dorian and the Lydian sounds, and actually also for just a mixed Lydian or even like a diminished type dominant sound. And here I'm just starting with a leading note, so I'm sliding into the C. And then I'm using the pattern that I talked about in the previous example, so that's this pattern. And then from the next string set as well. And then down to an E, skipping down to C, and then ending on the F sharp, which in this case is like the 13 on the A minor. And of course, I think all of these lines you can use them both on the A minor and also on the C Lydian sound. So it's really like whether it's Dorian or Lydian doesn't really matter too much. And this line would work just as well if you play it over C major 7 flat 5 or sharp 11. The second example, I'm also playing over an A minor chord, so over this A minor 13, but again you can use it on the C as well. I'm starting with basically the scale minus one note, so it's the scale minus a C, and that gives me this E minor at 9 arpeggio, so. And actually I'm just playing 2 octaves of that, down to the E again. Then we get a C shell voicing, and then an F sharp. And then just down the scale to end on the 9th of the A minor. So. The third example has a background of a C major 7 sharp 11 or flat 5 chord, just to really demonstrate that the Lydian idea works quite well. And the first part of it is an E minor triad, so this E minor first inversion triad with a leading note, so. And then the next part is a B sus4 triad. So E minor first, B sus4, then a C major 7 arpeggio. And then I'm repeating the first phrase again, so that's an E minor first inversion triad, but I'm with a leading note, but I'm playing it from this F sharp, so. This example is also really emphasizing the Lydian sound that you can use this scale for. I'm starting with a pattern that's coming out of this fingering, so. But I'm playing it descending, so I'm starting on the G, so. And then just using this octave. From this B, I'm just using an E minor triad, and then up to F sharp. And here I'm using the F sharp to just lead into a G major 7 shell voicing, followed by a C major shell voicing, and then down the E minor triad, and then ending on the sharp 11. As you can tell, I'm not really that concerned with which note is the root in the scale and what kind of tonality it implies, because the way I use pentatonic scales when I'm playing, well, at least when I'm improvising like this, it's really just a set of notes that have a certain sound. So they are certain extensions on top of another chord, and they have certain intervals and contain in that way a sound that I can put on top of another chord. So I'm really not concerned with what the root of the scale is, because I'm anyway mostly using this on 2 chords, one of which the root is not really even contained in the scale. And I think that's the most normal way to really work with pentatonic scales in jazz in general. If you have an idea for a pentatonic scale that I should try and go over and work through, like I'm working through this one, then leave a comment. And of course also, if you have an idea for some sort of arpeggio or structure that I forgot to talk about, then you can also leave a comment on that, because the more complete we have in terms of the more material we have on this scale, the better. And it can sometimes be difficult to just spot all the chords that are in there, of course. If you want to learn more about jazz guitar and this is the first time you see one of my lessons, then subscribe to my channel. I publish a new lesson every Thursday, and I've been doing this for quite some time, so there's already really a lot of material available on my channel. I'm really grateful for the support that I get from my patrons. It's because of the support that I get through my Patreon page that I can keep on making all these videos. And if you want to help me keep making videos, then check out my Patreon page. If you support me over there, then I can also give you something in return. That's about it for this week. Thank you for watching, and on to next week.